Yeah, good morning, everyone. I would like to give you a small introduction into how to build a progressive web app based on Aurelia JavaScript and the Plone-Rest-API. So, first of all, this is all a prototype we built like about the last half year. We got some funding from the German government for this project, so this allowed us to spend some time there and build this. The whole project is about empowering small farmers in basically in Zambia and India, and it's to help them, to give them the right informations and help them improving their lives and making more out of it. The goals for the project. It has to be a mobile app because what people use in Zambia and also in India is basically mobile. As I said, the target markets for us where we want to start it with the project was India and Zambia. Target platform, Android mainly, and also PC or whatever device you use where you have a browser. No iOS for now, because it's not important for in that markets from the market share. It might work, but some of the technologies will just not work yet on iOS. It also has to work offline, because especially in Africa, the coverage is not that great. So you have to have the possibility to get some informations when you are connected, like in a central place where they have Wi-Fi, and then take the information and read it later up. Okay, about the technologies. We decided to go completely browser-based. We also decided to go the way of building a progressive web app instead of creating an app for an app store or a native app. We realized this with the Aurelia JavaScript framework, and for the backend we just used mainly the Plone-Rest-API. So why progressive web app? First of all, it runs on many operating systems. Basically, the only thing you need is a modern browser. It allows us to make fast changes, fast deployments. So especially in the beginning, this is really key because you want to fix something, you want to add some features, and you want to roll it out and talk about it with the people. If you go on app stores, this takes days, and if you have a bug, this takes also days to fix it and stuff like that. It just slows us down. It's easy to build. You just need web technologies, so if you know JavaScript, HTML, CSS, should be enough. And with the modern technologies, we also have the offline support, and if you need to also push notifications, that's all possible by now. Why Plone as a backend? I don't think I have to talk about much, but yeah, it's a solid storage for the structured content we have. It fits really well for us there. We are also using the workflow and permission system. And most of all, the REST API is really nice, really flexible and powerful. And especially in the beginning, we also used just the normal backend to handle the content and add the content. This will also be integrated in the app, but especially in the beginning, we saved some time to go to the market. Why Aurelia? I don't know if you heard about it, but you have a lot of JavaScript frameworks out there for basically every taste. The reason why I like it is it's really simple and clean HTML-based templates. So it's in this way a little bit like Angular or Vue.js, for example. But you have to write less code than, for example, in Angular. So you have some good conventions. So you don't have to register every template and every Vue component together. You just name them with the same name so that they fit together. You can always overwrite this, but usually you don't need to do that. Aurelia that's similar to what Angular does. It's a full-featured framework, so you have the full functionality, including the routing, animations, and stuff. And for what it does, it has a relatively small footprint. And because of nice conventions, usually it stays just out of your way. You can have components which are just your code. There's no registration which is like hiding the one-line code or two-line code in smaller components you might have. The community, it might be not the biggest if you compare it to like Vue.js, for example, or React. But there are thousands of people using it. The chat room and forums are full of people exchanging ideas and helping each other. And I really like, they have a kind of big core team, so it's not like they are hiding in a room and releasing at some point something. So we have a lot of core team members there. It's a little bit, I would say, the same philosophy we have in the Plone community. It's open, everybody can contribute, but they also have some really smart minds which are like giving out the roadmap and just have a vision where to go. And last but not least, they are really doing and caring about release management. That's not the case in every JavaScript framework. So that's also important. Yeah, let me show. Not waiting. Oh yeah. Smaller, I don't know. Okay, basically what we have built here is in farming. This is international. You have the farming cycle. So you start at some point with planning, preparing, seeding, growing, and so on, until you store or eventually sell your products or use your products yourself. So we pick this up, and then you can dive into this, depending on where you are. If you're in the growing phase, you have some needs specific to that. And then you can dive into different topics until we finally have some content for this specification or category tree. In the back, this is basically like a nested folder structure, like a category tree. And eventually you will come to the to articles. So these are then informations which might tell you how to, I don't know, heal your plants when they have like some diseases, or you have pest issues, or for the storage, for example, you can find informations how to store your plants, because one of the main issues they have is like food waste, because they have nothing to keep them alive. So they have in some areas they basically go at 3 o'clock in the morning to harvest the crop, and at 6 or 7 it's on the market already. So they have to sell it at the same day for the price they get there. They have no other choice. And this is really an issue, because sometimes when they decide what they are going to plant, they look at the prices of the last year. Tomato was really high, so everybody's growing tomato. You can imagine what happened when they all at the same time have the tomatoes on the market then. So they almost losing money. And we try to give information on many different levels there. So far, this is a prototype. So the next steps will be getting in touch with more NGOs. Some of our team members are going into the field again in a couple of weeks with the prototype and talking to NGOs, so that we can actually have a lot of content information inside the platform. You also have related services, so depending on the categories you are in, you have services. By now it's basically a small introduction and then pointing to the website of the service. Sometimes it's an app, so you can have mobile apps where you make a picture of your plant and the mobile app tells you what disease the plant has. So this could be the solution, or you can find storage providers which are specifically addressing the market in Africa or India or wherever you are. Later on, we will work on integrating some of the service more into the platform, but for now, this is it. A little bit from the technical point, all these informations, when you clicked on them, it's relatively fast. The reason for that is that we cache a lot. So the plan is actually, this is currently not perfectly working, but you can pre-fetch all the content, or later on we want to say, okay, give me all the content in this category or something like that, or just the articles, or just the services. So that you can go offline after that and just surf. But it's also for speed, because what we are doing is we surf first from the cache always. So no matter how fast your internet connection is, if you had the content already, it's just there, and in the back it's automatically updated. We also have like self-registration, which will register users in Plone in the backend. What we also have integrated is a community forum. So we have a discourse forum which will use the login from the app here. So at the end, it's the Plone user which will be logged in the forum. And the nice thing about this curse is you can also access every single piece in the forum via the API, because this curse itself is just a JavaScript app. So we will later deeply integrate the category tree with the topics inside the forum. So we will have like sort of the same structure, so we can show ongoing discussions so in specific categories. Okay. Yes. A little bit about how to build a progressive web app. This looks kind of funny. Okay. First, you have to use HTTPS because of things like push notifications. That's just a requirement. What you should use anyway is a manifest file, because you have some options, some functionalities there. You can basically use it for every website, even if you don't want to build a PWA. You want to use Service Worker, which gives you the possibility to have these caching functionalities. You can even cache writes. So if you're not online, you can still save data, and as soon as you are online, it will get synced to the backend. Optionally, you can use Workbox. It's basically a small helper script from Google, which makes it even easier to set up Service Worker. So you just have to, you can use a Webpack plugin and 2 lines of JavaScript code, and that's it. You just have to decide what kind of strategy you want to go with. Yeah, and push notifications if you need it. The manifest file. You can define in a manifest file basically some metadata. So if you have a manifest file and you define a short name for your app, normal longer name, icons, the orientation, you can say, okay, is it flexible, or should I just stick to portrait or landscape mode? Background color for the splash screen, or even for the, in Android you have the title bar. You can configure this stuff. When you have the manifest file, the browser will allow you to save the website as an icon on your phone, or now even on Windows already, and Linux, Mac is coming soon. So you basically can save the app and use it as an app. And for this, especially on the phone, you need something like the short name. If you have the title and it's a little bit longer, you don't want like this text on the icons on your home screen. It looks a little bit like this. So you have a splash screen. Icon should be a little bit bigger, but after like short loading period, you end up in the app itself. This is an example of a manifest file. So yeah, you see you can define a short name. You can have multiple icons in different sizes. You also have a start URL. In this case, it's just the app itself. It depends a little bit if you want to separate your app from the backend. And on the display, you can, this is standalone, so it will look like an app. There's no browser bar, no location bar. You can allow that. There's also a minimal mode, but it's not supported by all of the browsers. So you can play with that. Service worker is the really powerful part here, because you gain, as I said, offline support, this caching functionality, which makes the look and feel of your app really fast. And with the Workbox plugin, it's that easy. I mean, some configuration depending on if you use Webpack or some other stuff, but that's really not much. And this is basically saying with a regular expression, everything which is coming from gaipa.org/app, which is the backend, gets cached. And the strategy we are using here is stay a while, revalidate. So it's first serve me the content from the cache, so give it fast. And then go to the backend, update your cache. Yeah, and the last line is then initializing this. You can have multiple of these routes, so you can handle static images differently than the JavaScript or the backend calls, so on. I could even cache the for example, if I would have integrated the forum by now, I could also say, okay, cache all the requests which are going to the discourse forum, so even that could be offline usable. So a little bit examples to how to work with Aurelia. As many of the JavaScript frameworks, you have an CLI to get you started with and have some skeleton functionality. Basically, you just add the Aurelia CLI, then you have our run watch inside your project, and this will give you the normal browser watching, reloading stuff functionality. You have the option when you create a project, you can decide if you want to use Webpack or some other bundler, if you want to go normal JavaScript, or if you want to use TypeScript, different testing options. So you have to answer some questions, but you can also just stick with the defaults. So Aurelia allows you to stick with plain JavaScript or with TypeScript, whatever you like more, and also with the bundling and installing packages, you have some options there. When you want to create a new component, you can use also the CLI. It's not doing that much because there's not much to do. For this, I mean, to create a component, you basically create the HTML file and the JavaScript file, like we are doing here with the simple top bar. So a JavaScript file looks like this. That's all. There's no import, nothing. So this is a basic component. Of course, you can have more functions defined there. For example, you have like a bind function and the activate function. So these are like hooks where you can do stuff in a specific time of the whole cycle Aurelia component has. So here we just define some variables. And in the template, it just, every template has these template tags, like in the web component specification. And then you use normal JavaScript string expressions there. So it's pretty standard and clean. Here's an example how to iterate over a list of values. I mean, we defined the friends here, so we have 2 friends. And then you just repeat over it. If you like ZOP page templates and know how to use it, you might like this too. I mean, it's pretty much the same. Also, I like the cleanness of this. Yeah, this is a little bit bigger. I should go here. Yeah. Example. So here we actually also have some imports. So it's not that Aurelia is doing anything without importing anything, but for simple stuff you don't need imports. And what we are doing here is we basically have, for accessing the content in the backend, so what the stuff we're getting from Plone, we're importing a service and we're injecting the service with a decorator. Also it goes here in the constructor, and then we put this in this variable, and from there on we can use the content API to get our content. Here we have the activate function. This will get called yeah, early in the when the component is getting activated. This is the right place to extract some parameters and put them in variables, so you can use them later, like here. Yeah, bind is like when the binding is done. So binding means yeah, binding the JavaScript definition with the front-end HTML template. Yeah. So what we are doing here is we're basically defining yeah, a path where we want to get data from, and then we call the function get service data, and this is using our content API, just calling the get service with the path. Service in not the best naming here, because service is here the service we saw in the app, so it's the service content, not the service as a functionality. So this is just using in the backend HTTP fetch. So modern, you can also use the a little bit older way to do, but yeah, this is pretty much standard. The component for this, the HTML part of the component would look like this. So we basically create some article tag, we put in the title, the description. So service is the variable where everything is in. Most of this is pretty simple to understand. This is like if you have HTML stuff, so the sanitize will strip out bad stuff a bit. And this is a way to how binding works. So what I really like on Aurelia is you read it and you understand it. It's like, okay, there's an href and this is bound to this variable. There's no cryptic, I mean, in Angular, for example, it's like some symbols, you have to know what they're doing. Here it's kind of clear. By default, you have either two-way or one-way binding, depending on where you use it. If you use it on an input field, it makes sense to have a two-way binding. If you use it like here, it's a one-way binding. You can always be specific, so you can say one-way, two-way, once. So we have ways to override the defaults there. Here we bind the title attribute of the tag. Yeah, that's it. Here's a small example of how a service looks like. As by default, when you define this JavaScript class here, it's everything is a singleton. So creating services is really easy. You don't have to do much. What we are importing here is basically the inject function to inject the HTTP library from Aurelia. So in this case, the fetch client version. there's also an HTTP client, because fetch has still some limitations. But fetch is way easier to use and the preferred way to go. So what we are doing here is we're injecting the HTTP client. This gets in with this name, so we assign it to this HTTP, and then we define a method which we can later use, and this will just do fetch. In this case, a simple JSON file. It could be also a URL. What you don't see here is you have one small configuration part where you say, okay, my default backend URL is this, and you can make some settings to configure once for the whole app how you talk to the backend. You can have multiple backends if you want, but in this case, you just for every call you just do like this. Yeah, and then you get a promise, unpack it, and return it. Enough for Aurelia. They have really good documentation, and there are also some books out which are worth reading. Some examples for the Plone-Rest-API. The good thing is the Plone-Rest-API in a current state is pretty much ready to do everything you want. There are not much situations where you say, okay, I cannot do this with the REST API. There are just a few places. You have access on all the content. You have access on most of pieces like the control panels, vocabularies, whatever, searching, switching workflows, whatever you might want in Plone. You can, most likely you can do it with the REST API directly without doing anything in customization. But it's also really flexible. Basically, you have these three things you most likely want to touch, things like serializer, or the other way around, deserialization, or maybe you want to create some services or components. There's a little bit naming clash there. For the serializer, that was the first what I had to touch. Usually the API will give you the values of different fields and of your content in a useful way. But sometimes you have specific needs, so you want to customize this. Or in my case, for example, I wasn't happy with what the REST API is giving me for vocabularies, for example. It just gave me the token. But on the client side, I don't need only the token. I also need the label or the name to show it. Of course, I could go to the backend and get the vocabulary, take the token, and tell me what's the actual title for this token. But this would need extra code on the client side, another request. So it would be nicer if my choice or multi-selection fields would just give me everything, not just one string. And it's pretty easy to do that. I mean, most of the code you see is boilerplate. So it's usually almost the same. What I left out here is this is just I'm getting the vocabulary. I'm with the token, and then I extract the title and give it back. So that the term in the end will not be just a string, but a little dictionary and then JavaScript object at the end, which has the title and the token, so that I can have both and don't need to ask the backend for more. So you have this serializer here, and the only thing here is then you have to register this adapter. Services, on the other hand, we have things like the content. So if I have like article or like pages in Plone or news items, I will call an URL, say, okay, give me this news item. So I will get the data for the news item. This might look like this, like in case for the front page. So, but what I do not have here is like things like the breadcrumbs or navigation or workflow actions. So if I want to have this, I can use I cut it a little bit down so that I have not too much space here. But for example, with the breadcrumbs, you have a list of accessible components or services you can use. And to get the breadcrumbs for the current context, you would just call this URL and would give you the breadcrumb data, like this. But this would need another request, and you have to write some extra stuff on the client side to do that. Sometimes that's what you want to do. Maybe you have a lot of services and you want to fetch them until you show the content already. But for simplicity, it usually makes sense to include this. So I want to have both together. The Plone-Rest-API gives me the expand functionality, so I can just name this service or multiple services, comma separated with the expand option in the URL. And what it does is it will give me still the list of components as before, but for the components I choose to expand, they will actually have the full content. So it's the same as calling the URL, but it's already included in my request for the page or for the news item. This is really handy. But it's not doing this all the time for all the services. Otherwise, we would have to load a lot of content, even if we don't need it. This combination is really powerful because you can combine this with custom services to do whatever you want. For example, getting some related content based on categories or and also expand this so that you have everything in one request. On the client side, this makes your code much simpler because you just say, give me the article, and the backend says, okay, you have the article and you have everything you need, like the navigation, the breadcrumb, whatever you want to show. If you have other parts of your application on the client side, you can also choose to not expand because that's your decision when you ask for the content. You can just have the article without the services, so you always have the options. To create a service, it's up to you how to do this in the backend. We probably also add this to the Plone CLI so that you have like a structure everybody knows. I like this way, like I created just a service folder in my backend package, and then for every service, like the related articles, I create another subfolder, like a Python module, and put the code there and the registration. This is the registration in the ZCML file. Basically two parts. The first is just an adapter, which is doing the actual work, like searching for related content by a category with a normal catalog search. And the second is the registration for the service, for the REST API, which basically takes the adapter and uses it and gives back the information. This is the code. It's a little bit long. So the constructor is not that interesting. Here you basically have the a little bit boilerplate to how to call the service. The actual code you have to or you can write down is here. So until here it's just boilerplate. So what I'm doing here is just taking the current context, reading out the field, which is basically just some tags, some categories, and then I do a catalog query for a portal type named chapter, which has the categories, and at the end I just iterate over this and create my JavaScript object, which will at the end be the JSON I give back. So what I basically do here is I'm emulating the kind of the same functionality you have like with when you call a folder. You have the listing, you get just the previews, like the title and the link to the actual items. That's what you get here. Okay, and this is the second part, the actual service, which is basically using the adapter and also setting the expand parameter, which will in the end reaching the lower part here of the code where you actually do your stuff. So that's how it looks at the end. You have a new entry in the components list, which is when you use it with the expand feature, will extract and expand or expand all your content, whatever you put in there. That's it. Any question?
Do you think if people using Aurelia usually use regular JavaScript or prefer TypeScript? As you mentioned, it's an action.
I think it's pretty much half and half, I would guess. Internally, the core team is switching more to TypeScript because for the framework itself, it allows you to give more like auto completions in IDEs and stuff like that. But if you want to use it for your project, that's up to you, and that they will keep this way. They are currently working on the bigger next version where they are doing a lot of improvements under the hood, but the main principles will stay the same. There's no big change in like the direction or anything. They just try to make things more modular so that you can even have like smaller footprints at the end, depending on what you are using, and things like that, and make it even faster. It's already fast, but yeah, they have some ideas. So there's a big refactoring for the next generation, but it will have not that much breaking changes for the users. Any other question?
In terms of the articles, in the example you showed us the article and it had pictures embedded in all that. Is that just straight from Plone that you pull the HTML through?
Yeah.
Images inside.
Yeah, you get this with JSON as JSON, and the only thing on the client side is you have to add some CSS to style it, because usually the styling is made in the backend. So basically, what you need is some template rendering on JavaScript side, then getting the JSON from the REST API. What I didn't mention is but it's in a REST API docu, you can use plugins to inspect the JSON and make just call and just look what the API is giving you back. So you see just the JSON, you can play with the parameters and see what is actually coming back, and then you start to put this in your JavaScript code. But yeah, it's really simple to start. The REST API is not doing anything which is like complicated to understand, but it's still flexible. It's not the ZOAP or the ZOAP with S thingy where you have like a lot of boilerplate and a lot of complex stuff. So it's really straightforward. Yeah, and I mean, if you're thinking about starting with client-side stuff, it gives you another flexibility. You have another abstraction layer. I mean, you have the user interface completely in your hand. It's not related to the backend. So this is powerful, and it's of course fast. It's the same backend, but it's way faster than doing everything in the backend. And the cool thing is you can integrate the stuff. Like with the JavaScript app in the front, I have another app which is written in Ruby, like the forum. I can integrate them and glue everything together. And I could have other backends, other services, and you just bring everything together, and the result is just your app. The user will not know what's in the backend. That's the cool thing there. Any other question? Then, thank you.